In 2006, I lived in South Bend, Indiana. I worked overnights at Walmart, and I had to walk to work. It was 5 miles each way, and it wasn't the greatest way to travel. This trip took me through the north end of downtown, past Notre Dame's golf course, campus, and eventually to Roseland, and then finally to Walmart. With two exceptions, I never passed by any pedestrians. One guy was on a bike. One of the first nights I made this trip, he was fine. It was the other guy who was strange. There's a section of the street, from the top of South Bend to the bottom of the golf course, that there were no streetlights and barely a sidewalk to walk on. The last night I was employed at Walmart, in this pitch black spot, I passed this guy. While a car passed by, I noticed there wasn't anything physically abnormal, but as soon as I saw him, I got the creeps. He was around 5 feet 10 inches, 200 pounds, dark hair, and he was staring directly at me. As he was walking towards me, I started sweating and was becoming terrified very quickly. As we passed each other, everything in my body screamed to run away as fast as I could, so I did. I was a big dude. I ran like the wind, too out of breath to scream. When I couldn't run anymore, I turned around, convinced I was going to die, and saw no one. Great, I just freaked out for no reason, I thought to myself. I continued on my way, finished my shift, and went home. Nothing else happened while I was in Indiana. That week, I moved back to Tennessee and continued my life, thinking nothing about that night. 1 week later, I received a phone call from one of my dad's police officer friends from South Bend who wanted to make sure I was okay. I confirmed that I was 300 miles away, safe and sound. He explained to me that they were working on catching a serial killer who was targeting homeless people and shoving their dead bodies into manholes. He described a guy who was 5 feet 10 inches, around 200 pounds, dark eyes, dark hair. I was terrified all over again. He described what sounded like the exact guy I saw. He said the path of murder was crossing my path to work, a path I had walked for 6 months. I have no idea what could have happened if I stayed at that job for another week. This happened circa 1971 or 1972, when my mother was about 14 or 15 years old. The incident occurred in a heavily wooded area near Montevallo, Alabama. My mother is the oldest of 5 children. She has 3 sisters and a brother, who is the baby of the family. One weekend in the cooler months of the fall, my grandfather decided to take the whole family's, my grandmother, my mother, and all my aunts and uncles, so 7 people total, into the woods for target practice with a rifle. My mother grew up quite poor and they didn't always live in the best neighborhoods, so my grandfather wanted to teach the kids how to defend themselves with the rifle if need be. Like I said, it was later in the fall, so the trees were bare and there were lots of leaves on the ground. The wooded area was just off a dirt road, so this was a fairly rural area they were in. Since it was so far off the beaten path, my grandfather became startled when he heard the roar of a car engine so deep in the woods. My mom remembers the car as being a blue Ford Galaxy. Despite the fact that my grandfather had a gun, he totally freaked out and told my grandma and the kids to hide under a pile of leaves in the woods. He hid with them. The man in the driver's seat got out, dragged a woman's body out of the car, and just dumped her there in the woods and drove away. After my grandfather was sure the man had gone, everyone came out of hiding and the woman sat up and stared them straight in the face. My grandfather asked the woman if she needed help. She said no, she would be fine. She didn't seem to be injured and obviously didn't want help. She hadn't put up a fight with the man when he was dragging her out of the car. My grandfather cut the shooting lesson short and decided to rush the kids home to safety. On the trail back to the dirt road where my grandfather had parked their car, they passed the man in the blue Ford Galaxy driving out of the woods. My mom looked over and noticed that he had a huge machete laying across the front seats right beside him. My grandfather made sure that the man could see that he was carrying a rifle, but everyone was careful not to give away what they had just seen. The man struck up small talk with my grandfather, asked him how he was doing and what they were doing out in the woods. My grandfather explained that he had just taken his family out for some target practice with the rifle. The man told him to have a nice day and continued driving. The next day, my grandfather went back out to that spot in the woods. There was not a body there. However, he did find the woman's wig, her purse, some Kleenex, and a pair of eyeglasses. He collected the items and took them home. According to my grandfather, that area of the woods was known for having shallow graves and being a dumping site for bodies. My mother became hysterical when he walked in the door carrying that stuff. She started screaming he killed that lady. My grandfather ended up taking the items to the police station, but my mom doesn't think anything ever came of it. She never heard anything else about it after that. Well, she did hear one other thing about it, I guess. Early the next morning, my grandmother called my mom when she arrived at work, just before the kids left for school. She told them not to take the bus that day, that she would come home and pick them up and drive them to school. When my mom asked why, my grandmother said, "Because that car is waiting for you at the bus stop." My family lived in one of the nicer neighborhoods of my city, and unfortunately muggings weren't uncommon, though to my knowledge at the time, none had resulted in anyone's death. I wasn't really following the neighborhood news, or any news really. I could tell my mother was getting increasingly worried over the past few months, but I just didn't care enough to ask why. She kept reminding me to lock all the doors, travel in groups, not talk to strangers, yada yada yada. Our first fight about this happened when I was told I was not allowed to walk home from the train anymore. I was taking some extracurricular lessons at the center of the city and rode the train to the end of the line where we lived, which was in no way remote. Our apartment building was about a 10-minute walk from the station, and I had been doing that distance since I was little. I could literally do it with my eyes closed. I usually walked around with my headphones on and my old and much beloved CD player in my bag, listening to something loud and grungy, feeling completely safe in my little bubble of melodious solitude. Lots of yelling and screaming, lots of "you still treat me like a child, you don't trust me, you are suffocating me, you are taking away my freedom, you are the world's worst mother ever" drama. You get the idea. Eventually we came to a compromise. As long as there was still light out, I could walk home. Otherwise, I'd give her a call and she would come pick me up. I was fine with that, for the time. On that particular night, however, I was really, really angry. Don't ask me what about. I honestly don't remember the reason, I just remember the wrath. I wanted to scream bloody murder, and the feeling got even more exacerbated when I realized I had to call my mommy to pick me up. Nope, no way I was doing that. Didn't matter that it was raining. I wasn't a baby or made of sugar. I got out of the train, ignored the heavy rain, and marched straight home. On the outside, I must have looked like a normal 16-year-old listening to some music while hurrying home, but on the inside, I was preparing to crush my enemies, see them kneeling before me, and hear the lamentation of their women. The way from the station to my home is pretty well lit, except from one turn. Back then, there were unkempt hedges on both sides of the corner, one in front of the abandoned lot, and no street lights at all for about 100 feet. I approached the turn completely oblivious of my surroundings, internally planning my revenge against a yet unidentified foe, when someone jumped out beside me from the bushes, wielding a large kitchen knife. Most of what follows, I remember in a blur. I don't remember what he looked like. It was dark and he was wearing a hood. I remember he smelled strongly of medicinal alcohol, but I honestly don't recall him saying anything. He probably didn't have enough time to anyway. Because when he jumped out of the shadows, I was so startled I dropped my Discman. And that was it. I saw red and completely lost it on the guy. All of the day's frustration poured out of me like a dam breaking, and I unleashed a torrent of swear words at him, most of which I made up on the spot. I completely ignored the knife, shoved him back hard, kept screaming, "Are you fucking kidding me?" over and over, and bent over to pick up my shattered CD player. I don't know what he did, and to this day, I don't know why he didn't attack me when I was crouched down, but when I gathered all the pieces and I stood up, he was nowhere to be seen. Holding the pieces of my broken Discman and CD, I continued my march home. When I got home, I got straight into a fight with a furious mother for not calling her, and made sure not to mention what happened out of fear that it would give credence to her side. The gravity of it all hit me in the shower after the adrenaline had subsided, and yet I think I still cried more for my broken Discman than for realizing the danger I had put myself through and what I had just survived. It all came crashing down on me 2 days later, when one of my neighbors was found stabbed in the lot behind the hedge where I was attacked. I didn't know her that well, we went to Sunday school together, but my family and hers were neighbors for years. I overheard my mother talking on the phone about the serial killer that was making his rounds around the most affluent parts of the city, and how this was the latest in a series of muggings and stabbings in the area.